Hi there, welcome to my gaming vlogs. I have been playing racing games for all my life now. Over this time, I experienced the transition from 16-bit 2D games to glorious 3D, and the development of arcade, simcades, and most recently, full-blown racing simulators. Over the last 10 years, the fun of playing racing games has become a hobby for me, and I dived into this amazing world of sim racing. To understand better the state of sim racing today, I did a little study on how it evolved over the past years. In this video, I will summarize a bit of what I have learned and share with you my perspective on this amazing hobby that is keeping me more busy than I would have liked. In this video, I will talk a little bit about the evolution of sim racing from the beginning of the 1980s to the most recent advances in VR racing. I hope you all enjoy it, and remember, if you like this type of content, please like and share this video. It helps a lot with the video creation and will allow me to invest more time and effort in developing this type of content. The development of racing simulator walks hand in hand with the evolution of video games. Games like Pole Position and Enduro were one of the first commercially successful racing games. They were released in the arcade and later popularized by the Atari 2600 home console at the beginning of the 1980s. At the time, Atari advertised them as an unbelievable driving realism experience, and since their appearance, they captured the attention and the imagination of many players, although they were not more than some pixels moving on the screen. But that was only the beginning. The evolution of racing games in the 1980s happened at a very fast pace. Pole Position 2 was released by Namco in 1983, first for the arcades, and not long after that ported to the Atari 7800, Commodore 64, and even MS-DOS based personal computers. This game allowed players to choose tracks that resemble real-life racing tracks, such as the Fuji Speedway, Indianapolis, Long Beach, and Suzuka. The game was extremely well received at the time, showing that there was a market for realistic simulation of car racing. The gaming companies started to pay attention to this market, but given that the home consoles of the time lacked the power to reach a certain complexity on simulation, the biggest evolution of sim racing happened in the arcades. In 1983, the Japanese gaming company Namco licensed the TX1 arcade machine, which implemented several advanced racing car mechanics for the time. It included specific hardware for steering, acceleration, and braking controls, and a manual shifter. It also had a realistic physics game engine that made players lose control of the car if they accelerated too much into a corner or did not downshift to the right gear. The TX1 also used a form of primitive force feedback that made the steering wheel vibrate in certain situations, for example when heavy braking. The arcade cabinet featured a triple screen setup, allowing the players to be surrounded by the game, creating a very neat immersion effect that blew the minds of the 1980s players. From mid-1980s, hydraulic simulators were used for the first time to introduce motion to these games. Sega released the motorbike simulator Hang-On in 1985 that used this technology. Together with vibration force feedback, the simulator was a success and served as the basis for the development of future games such as Outrun. In 1986, Konami released the WEC Le Mans arcade game, one of the first simulators for prototype racing, in this case using the 24 hours of Le Mans competition as a background. The simulated track was said to be accurately reproduced, and the game used force feedback technology to simulate the road imperfections vibrating the cabin and the steering wheel. At the end of 1980s and the beginning of the 1990s, the first games to implement 3D polygons started to appear, introducing a whole new level of immersion. Games such as Virtua Racing and Daytona USA became the standard and most advanced racing arcade games, featuring full hydraulic motion, force feedback, and simulated real tracks. By the 1990s, there was a big paradigm shift on racing sims. The arcade games became more and more focused on the fun aspect of racing, with colorful tracks and fast-paced action. At this time, personal computers started to get more popular and powerful enough to run complex simulation games, and became the preferred platform for players that want a more realistic approach to racing in contrast to the arcade experience. In 1989, the first complex sim racing game for PC is released, the Indianapolis 500 The Simulation, by the Papyrus design group Game Studio. This game introduced a realistic physics engine, including the simulation of 4 tire contact points with the asphalt, relation of performance and temperature, and aerodynamics. The inclusion of realistic parameters and physics changed the way these games were played. Now, instead of controlling only the acceleration and braking, a driver would have to follow lifelike racing techniques such as trail braking, follow proper racing lines, and making the right downshifts. The Indianapolis 500 also featured the full telemetry and the possibility for the players to adjust their car settings such as tires configuration, suspension and shocks controls, and parameters for the wings placement. As the home consoles is starting to get more powerful, racing games with a certain simulation environment started to appear, in particular the ones developed together with real racing drivers, such as the Nigel Mansell's World Championship for the Super Nintendo.
Hi, I'm Nigel Mansell, and you know, I'm not the type of guy who buys his family presents that he really wants for himself. That's why I bought my wife Nigel Mansell's World Championship game from Nintendo. You have to choose the right tires, pit stop, and race against the best drivers in the world. It's just like the real thing, and my wife loves it. Right, darling?
Hi, it's very realistic, Nigel.
My little girls love it too. Right, twins?
Completely true.
Hey, even my dog loves it. Right, Fang? Woof. So, there you have it. I think it's a wonderful game, and if your family's anything like mine, they'll love it too. Right, girls?
Right.
Woof.
Nigel Mansell intentionally chose your Nintendo.
And the popular Ayrton Senna's Super Monaco GP for the Sega Mega Drive, or Genesis if you're in the US.
To win, to be number one, and to have fun at the same time.
アイルトン・セナの感性がレーシングゲームをさらなる進化へと導く
And the challenge.
アイルトン・セナスーパーモナコ GP2 メガドライブからレーシングゲームのナンバーワングリッドへ
These games mix the fun of arcade experience with some characteristics of the sim racing games, being they start what we call today as simcades. But the most promising and complete racing simulator on the 1990s was the Grand Prix series developed by Microprose. Starting with the Formula 1 Grand Prix from 1991, Microprose Simulator had everything. Rich physics engine, including the simulation of the entire car, tires and environmental aspects, full telemetry, and a total control of the car's settings. All these paired with competitive NPCs and a full representation of Formula 1 as a sport, with all the rules, settings and tracks well represented. The series lasted for 4 versions, spanning from the 1991 season in Grand Prix 1, 1994 season in Grand Prix 2, the 1998 season in Grand Prix 3, and the 2002 season in Grand Prix 4. It became the most popular racing simulator for many years, in particular because it allowed multiplayer games and modding by a booming online community which created several championships and teams dedicated only to sim racing. By the 2000s, the level of simulation in these games became quite impressive, which of course pushed away players that were not so much into the simulation aspects. Once again, the sim racing scene was separated between the simcade games and the full simulators. The simcade games made use of some simulation aspects, but there was a reduced impact of realistic physics, making them more accessible to the normal players. The Formula 1 series, first from EA, then from Codemasters, and now back at EA, is a great example of that. Other examples are the popular Gran Turismo and Forza series for the PlayStation and Xbox platforms respectively. At the same time, given the interest raised by the online community on supporting and modding older simulator games, racing simulation as a platform appeared. iRacing, Race Room, and Automobilista, for example, are simulators that are fully focused on the competition aspects of racing, removing the offline story modes which are present on simcades. At the end of the 2010s and the beginning of the 2020s, we see a big shift on sim racing, but now as a business. With the dissemination of good simulators and the fact that computers and accessories are getting more and more accessible, we see a surge of popularity in this area. Racing simulation became one of the powerhouses of the esports surge over the last 10 years, which attracted a large infrastructure around it as a business. Today, big companies are involved on the development, distribution, and competition aspects of sim racing, which makes it a great place for enthusiasts like me to enjoy it as a hobby. While sim racing software evolved in a fast pace since the 1980s, the same cannot be said about the peripherals and the specific hardware in general. During the arcade time, the evolution of hardware support for these games was fast, with the presence of early force feedback functionalities and even motion simulators. In the 1990s, however, the price and availability of these accessories for the use at home made them quite impractical. The first home-based force feedback wheels were quite expensive and of difficult access to most of the players. This changed in the 2000s, with a great variety of accessories reaching the market. Through this decade, companies such as Thrustmaster, Logitech, and Madcat released powerful force feedback wheels that were basically plug and play and supported by most of the racing simulations of the time. After 2010, the racing simulator market starts to expand and more accessories are started to be available, while force feedback racing wheels became more accessible. Specialized companies started to provide impressive pedal sets, gearboxes, and hydraulic handbrakes. Over the last 5 years, with the development of sim racing as a business, other companies started to provide very specific products, such as wind and G-force simulators, motion sims that can be used at home, a huge variety of cockpits and supports for different settings. But none of the other accessories had a larger impact on sim racing immersion than the VR headsets, popularized by the half of the 2010s decade by the Oculus Rift and the Valve Index. Racing in VR is different than anything else. Paired with a good racing simulator and the best accessories, you're able to sense any change on the racetrack and measure with perfection distance and gaps. The immersion feeling makes a big difference on the gaming experience, although it will not necessarily make you faster. Being able to have a full-depth sensing of your surroundings can make you more consistent, as you have a better spatial location of where your car is and where you want it to be. Consistency for sure is the key for successful racing, so besides the fun of racing on VR, you still can develop habits that will improve your racing skills. I am racing in VR for the last 10 years, and for me, everything started with the Project Cars 2 game and the Oculus Rift headset. Now I'm racing mostly on iRacing and Automobilista 2, which are great simulators. Last year, I acquired the MetaQuest 3 headset, and it's just amazing. It has a great edge-to-edge clarity and resolution, and because of its initial price of €500, it is a great investment for anyone entering in this hobby. It is difficult to capture the immersion provided by the VR headset in video, but I would like to share with you all at least a glimpse of it. Full lap at the Interlagos circuit on the legendary McLaren MP44 Formula 1 car, driven by Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna at the 1988 Formula 1 season. Before I get there, I have received this week the latest update on my racing simulator setup. Now I think everything is ready and set to race in this amazing car. Well everyone, that's it for me today. Thank you very much for watching the video, and I hope you all enjoyed it. See you all in the next one.